I heard this story on the public radio program This American Life, and I've never forgotten it, and I wanted to share it with you. The storyteller's name is Jack Hitt. He said that when he was a younger father, his daughter was 4 years old, and it was Christmas time, and his daughter asked him what Christmas was all about. And he told her, well, Christmas is when we celebrate the birth of this guy named Jesus. And the little girl wanted to know all about Jesus, and they started reading Bible stories together. And they would stay up sometimes and talk about what they read and about the ancient words of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the father is excited that his daughter wants to know more and more about Jesus. Well, a little bit of time passes, and one day they're driving, and they pass by a Catholic church that has a crucifix in the front of it. Now, you understand the difference between a cross and a crucifix. A crucifix has a person on it. Jesus is hanging on the cross on a crucifix. And so the little girl asks her dad, "What is that?" pointing to the crucifix. And the dad says, "Well, I realize I didn't tell you the whole story about Jesus. In his message, in do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and all that he did, he got some people kind of mad." Now, you have to remember, he's talking to a 4-year-old, and I can speak with experience that sometimes it's hard to thread the needle on how exactly to word these things. But he's explaining that Jesus' message got a lot of people mad, and the Roman government was at odds with him, and in the end, they felt they had no choice but to kill him. And the little girl said, "Oh." So a little bit more time passes, and the girl has school off one day because it's Martin Luther King Day. And the father takes work off to spend the day with his daughter, and they're eating breakfast, and on the newspaper on the breakfast table is a big picture of Martin Luther King Jr., and the little girl asks her dad, "Who's this?" And the dad says, "Well, that's Martin Luther King Jr. He's the reason that you don't have to go to school today." And the little girl says, "Okay, well, who is he though?" And the dad said, "Well, he was a preacher." And the girl said, "You mean like a preacher about Jesus?" And the dad said, "Well, yeah, he was a preacher about Jesus. And he also had this other message, which was that everybody should be treated the same, no matter what color their skin is." And the little girl says to him, "You mean like what Jesus said?" And the dad says, "Well, I guess I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I think you're right. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you is a lot like everybody should be treated the same no matter what color their skin is. That's right." And the little girl looked to him and said, "Did they kill him too?" Well, like the little girl and her dad, it's easy for us to forget the whole story. Jesus, as is true for all human beings, was complex, and in the fullness of his human experience, Jesus shows us that the long-term goal of peace and unity comes at the short-term cost of strife and division. You know, we think of Jesus as gentle and patient. We have pictures of Jesus sometimes where he's depicted in the field petting little lambs and sheep, sometimes sitting with children. We also think of Jesus as the embodiment of not division, but unity and inclusion. Jesus was intentionally in ministry, we remember, with those who were excluded by mainstream society. He was in ministry with lepers, even though they were deemed unclean. He was in ministry with Samaritans, even though they were an ethnic group that was at odds with the Jewish people of that time and that place. Jesus was willing to violate norms if it was for the sake of love and unity and inclusion. The prevailing understanding of the Sabbath at the time meant that no one should do any work for any reason on the Sabbath, but Jesus said, well, if it's to feed people, if it's to love people, if it's to heal them, then it's okay. After all, he says, the Sabbath is God's gift to us, not the other way around. Maybe we remember when there was a woman who was about to be stoned for committing adultery. And what did Jesus do? He came to her defense. At great personal risk, he came to her defense. Or maybe the Samaritan woman at the well who came at high noon and who was suffering from a deep sense of shame. When no one else would approach her, Jesus does approach her and engages her and dignifies her and listens to her. And through his love, she is changed for the better. Jesus' disciples are themselves people kind of on the outskirts of society. And even after they become his disciples, they're not always particularly faithful. They tend to argue. They tend to hope that Jesus is something else than what he actually is. But over and over again, despite their shortcomings, what does Jesus do? He loves them. He forgives them. He trusts them. Unity over division is the prevailing theme we see over and over again. It's so true that he says if there is a big flock of sheep and one veers away, he's willing to leave the flock for that one. He wants them all to be together so badly. Jesus said, go and make disciples of how many nations? One nation? Was it a couple nations? All nations. Again and again, inclusion of everyone. One of my favorite spiritual teachers, Richard Rohr, has called Jesus the great includer. And when he does this, he is largely talking about this cosmic kind of Jesus, leaning heavily on John chapter 1, where Jesus was there in the beginning. And so there's this sense in this cosmic Jesus that God's grace encompasses everyone and everything. For God so loved the world, he said. 2 Corinthians 5 refers to Jesus as the one who died for all. Jesus was a ransom for all in 1 Timothy 2. And maybe the most important vision of unity and inclusion happens at the table, where all are invited to feast if they approach with faith. Jesus promises his body and blood given for them and for whoever loves. By your Spirit, make us one with Christ, one with each other, one in ministry to all the world. I think you get the point. Well, how do we reconcile the great includer, the Jesus of mercy and inclusion, with the same Jesus who turns over tables in the temple. How do we make sense of that? How do we make sense of the Jesus of mercy and unity with the one who speaks in Matthew 23? If you guys want some spicy reading later, Matthew 23 is a good chapter for you. This is Jesus' roast session of the scribes and Pharisees, an explication of their hypocrisy. This is the one where Jesus famously says, "Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted." This is where Jesus issues his woes, and they are just ruthless. He accuses them of locking people out of the kingdom of heaven. For you cross sea and land to make a single convert, and you make the new convert twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. He calls them greedy. He calls them blind fools. He says, you clean the outside of the cup and of the plate, but inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence. He tells them they ignore justice and mercy and faith. For you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but on the inside are full of bones of the dead and all kinds of uncleanness. And for the coup de grace, one of the great sayings of Jesus, you snakes, you brood of vipers, how can you escape the judgment of hell? I hope you see both sides of Jesus, and it's natural to struggle in reconciling the two. So, of course, how do we reconcile the great includer with the one who says, I have come to cast fire upon the earth? Actually, to be honest with you, when I read that Monday morning, I almost cast it aside. Almost chose another one so I didn't have to talk about it. I have come to cast fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already ablaze. Last week, if you remember, we started to see Jesus pick up the sternness of his tone, and he gives this warning to be ready and for his disciples to have their lamps lit. Well, there's a passage that happens in between last week's passage and this week's. And in it, Peter asks Jesus if that lesson about keeping our lamps lit, was that about us? And Jesus, you can just tell the frustration is building that no one seems to understand what he's saying, so he expands the parable a bit, and he gets super harsh. He says that when the master returns home from the wedding banquet, there's one slave who prevents the other slaves from having their lamps lit, and he extinguishes them. And this same slave is drunk and cannot pay attention to when the master returns. And Jesus says, do you know what happened to that one who was causing all these problems? And Jesus says, the master kills him. And so we're in this moment of distress. And the scripture even says that. Jesus is feeling distress. We forget about the Nicene Creed, which says that Jesus was truly human. Sometimes he is the happy Jesus in the field with the sheep, but sometimes he is distressed. Sometimes anger comes through him. He says, I have a baptism for which to be baptized, and one constraint I am under until it's completed. In other words, I have a purpose and a goal here, but there are all these factors working against me, and this is getting so difficult, and I am frustrated. He gives these examples of divisions he seeks to cause within the household, father against son, mother against daughter, and it comes across as if these are generational divides. I wonder if there is some wisdom there. The truth is, We actually face a logical issue when we make the claim that Jesus seeks to include everyone, because to do so would be to include people dedicated to division. Jesus can't walk up to a group of men on the verge of stoning a woman caught in adultery and both sides it. It doesn't work for him to soften his message, because to do so would be to get in the way of his ultimate purpose. Jesus does need to take a side. He does need to side with that victim, with the oppressed, in order to effect a larger change. In the short term, it's hard. Jesus does not compromise his dedication to justice. So what happens is, when Jesus is seeking out the least and the last and the lost in all the ways we've described, when he empowers those on the margins, he is at the same time disrupting the structures that protect the rich and powerful of his time. So, in other words, in this effort toward inclusion, Jesus necessarily challenges the structures that are in place designed to maintain power for the few. There is necessary conflict, necessary division, necessary strife in order to achieve the long-term vision of peace and unity. We know that this is so true and the strife so intense that Jesus ends up on the cross. He is arrested and killed. But then we also remember what happens after that. Jesus is resurrected. And after that, the church forms. So we see this kind of cycle where over and over again, strife and division give way to something greater. The famed preacher Brian McLaren put it this way: the peacemaker often makes things worse before they get better. I wasn't alive in the 1950s or 60s. I never witnessed in person the horrors of Jim Crow laws in place at that time, but I have seen footage. I've seen a standoff between law enforcement officers holding big hoses face to face with unarmed, peaceful protesters. I've seen some of Martin Luther King's speeches, and I've read that the FBI labeled him an agitator. And I know that he was shot and killed in Memphis on April 4th, 1968. Honestly, and this might seem strange, but as I look at those images and reflect on that time period, the truth is that feels to me like a totally different world. Now, of course, there is a lot of work to do and injustices that need to be addressed, but all of this is to say that the world that I see in those images and in that footage is so different because of the strife that happened, because of the struggle of the civil rights leaders. All that pain that they experienced, all that division they caused was worth it. And the reason I know it's worth it is because I've never seen a water fountain that said whites only. Of course, there's a lot more work to do. He said to the crowds, "When you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say it's going to rain, and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say there will be a scorching heat, and it happens. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret this present time? Maybe the question for us today is, how do we interpret this present time? So I know we have some guests, and no one has to stand or do anything, but I thought I might ask some of our college students who are here, what are the injustices worth challenging, even if they cause division? Do you guys have anything? You're on the spot, so don't feel any pressure. But is there something that's heavy on your heart, or something you've observed that maybe has come to surface during the sermon? Yeah. Deportation. That's right. Because it seems largely like it's not all about deportation, it's also about a kind of cruelty that seems unprecedented. Thank you for sharing that. I am tired of hearing powerful people say that climate change isn't real. I am tired of hearing the words diversity, equity, and inclusion as if they are curse words. I am tired of influential people whitewashing human rights violations around the world. And do you want to know what I'm especially tired of? I am tired of people making these claims and perpetrating these lies in the name of God. Jesus does not want the church to look the other way. He wants the church to take a stand boldly in a way that may cast fire on the earth. Because one day Jesus will return. His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In the meantime, may God bring division that gives way to unity, and may the church be a part of it. Amen.